I think the statement "pro wrestling is fake" it's always been sort of bizarre to me. I think there's this human nature thing to want to always feel like you're better than other people, and so wrestling gets made fun of as a result, like anything else. I don't understand it really, because wrestling being presented as a legitimate contest between people has not been the case for such a long time. And I mean, I'm not sure if anyone went back to the 80s and really thought that what was happening in front of them was a legitimate athletic contest, that I would question their intellect a little bit. But at the same time, it's a form of entertainment. I don't sit down in a movie theater when I'm watching, an Avengers movie and stand up and be like, "You guys all realize this isn't real, right?" And it's like, yes, we all are complicit in the fact that this isn't real. That's why we're here. We're here to watch something fantastical, and wrestling is fantastical. My name is Scott Holznagel, professionally known as Leon Scott. I'm a pro wrestler since 2001. I also help coordinate booking for Fest Wrestling, Nerd Street Wrestling, do some creative stuff there, and then also work and help people with gimmick stuff, promo work, things like that.
You should punch out Ted Turner backstage now.
Stay the course. Heard that term a lot. And that's what Booker T is doing right now. Opportunity knocks, and Booker T has stepped through the open door, if I can add a little cliche.
What made me want to get into professional wrestling was I grew up in the early 1980s. So obviously the WWF was huge at that time. It was the first big wrestling push into national media. My dad was a fan of wrestling in the early 80s and introduced me to it. And I'd say probably around 4 or 5 years old is when I can really remember the first things that I saw in wrestling. It's funny because all the athletics I did in school were always with wrestling in mind. I didn't actually care about playing football, and I didn't actually care about, amateur wrestling. It was because I wanted to become a pro wrestler, and I thought these were things that you needed to do in order to get to that place. So to get started with that, you would need to go to a wrestling school. And in order to actually get in the ring and wrestle, you have to know fundamentals of wrestling, how body movements are supposed to work, how moves are put together. Things that seem fairly simple, like a body slam or a vertical suplex, are in reality complicated in terms of understanding how a body should move, how it should land, how to make it look good versus how to just do something that looks somewhat correct. It has to be a reputable school, because it can't just be somebody's backyard or behind a barn somewhere that happens to have a ring, because anyone can buy a ring. You want to find someone who has a track record of training people who are good, developing people who eventually go on to do successful things, and who have trainers who have some kind of a background of success. You're not going to want to find somewhere because it's cheap. It might cost you a lot of money to go. It might be somewhere that's a couple hours of drive away to get to, and it's going to require some significant dedication or relocation in order to make it happen. And then from there, it's going to be understanding that there's going to be an intensive amount of many months, maybe a year, before you're actually able to work shows and be competent enough to be trusted in front of an audience.
I try to keep fit, all the time. I try to make sure that this is maintained. Don't get lazy. Don't slow down, because maintaining a certain amount of physicality and a certain amount of fitness is absolutely necessary. Obviously, there's a strength component, a speed component, a fitness component. Got to do your cardio, got to work your legs, got to work your core, put yourself in a good physical condition. Otherwise, for one, you're going to probably be terrible and you're not going to be able to execute things well. You're also in charge of protecting someone, which means if you're feeble or if you're weak or if you're slow, you're going to potentially hurt someone or just provide a poor performance overall. The other thing is you just don't want to break down. So the more in shape you are, the more consistent you are, and also being able to bounce back. If I do get hurt, I'm obviously in a position to be able to know what I need to do to get better and what I need to do to compensate for that and try to work on getting into better shape, basically doing your own physical therapy. There's a lot that goes into it, and you have to be an athlete nowadays. You couldn't get by not being one.
Hey, can I get some help out here? I don't want to deal with this guy. He's very mean. He's evil.
This is garbage.
Good guy.
It was an injury replacement, and I injured the guy, and now I replace him.
Hey,
that's how it works.
Old man. Whoa! I need you out of my ring.
Those are strong.
I'm trying to have a real finals match
Not
here.
going anywhere. I played by the rules. I was an injury
Look
replacement.
at this. Look, my dream team came together. My dream team came together. Can you get him out of here?
No.
Rob Killjoy?
You think I'm afraid of it?
Are you mad at me for beating you?
Baby, I love you.
Oh, what a blessing. You're not mad at me? Mike, are you mad I beat you?
Damn, I'm not afraid of any last one of you. I'll fight all four of you.
You have my all four?
All four of you. You guys ready? Bring it. Because I'm ready.
What? What? Boy, you're not ready. Oh, baby. Oh, you baby. Hey! Oh! You want
For people who feel like they can't afford to go to wrestling school, I mean, my best advice would be you need to decide how much you really want it. It's expensive, but all together, I mean, wrestling is going to be expensive. It's going to cost you money to maintain a car. It's going to cost you money to get good gear. It's going to cost you money to feed yourself. I mean, just maintaining a body, especially if you're looking to put on some size, is very expensive. If the expenses of pro wrestling are worrisome, then I would say that you have two options. Either one, you can quit while you're ahead and just assume that it's not for you, because it's going to cost you money to make it work. Or you could really work your ass off to get there. It might mean taking 2 jobs. It might mean taking 3 jobs. I mean, I think probably from 2004 to 2008 or 9, I was working 2 or 3 jobs at a time. And that was just so that I could maintain my car and, keep it insured, be able to feed myself, 3 or 3,000 calories or more a day, and getting in 200 or 300 grams of protein, or more sometimes. It costs money to be a successful pro wrestler. You'll make money. For a long time, you won't make a lot. I mean, you might be lucky enough to get thrown a few bucks for gas or what have you. It's going to really depend on the promoter and whether or not they're willing to throw you any money for participation. That changes over time. And sometimes you have to be willing to be the squeaky wheel in order to get greased, which means you're going to have to ask for more money at certain points. You should probably try to be objective and know whether or not you're worth more. If your work is still very sloppy and you know you're still really green, and you're just getting 20 or 30 bucks to work, now's probably not the time to ask. If you're showing value and you're elevating on the card, maybe you can ask for more money. For the most part, independent wrestling is not going to pay your bills for a while. You're going to have to work a long time. You're also going to have to find creative ways to make more money. Merchandise helps. If you have t-shirts, hats, stickers, whatever you can come up with that you think will work, you might have to invest a few $100s in order to make that happen. But you'll also be able to make money off of that. And that means coordinating that. You're going to have to make sure that your table's set up before the show, that you're out immediately during intermission, that you're there after the show, in order to hustle and get that money for you.
So during the rest of the week, I am the customer love manager for Admiral. We're a tech company in Gainesville, a software as a service company. What we do is we work with publishers to help them with ad block, ad revenue recovery, as well as a couple of other things in the visitor relationship management space. This is what my day job is. This is what I do to make my primary income. The nice part about that is that it has afforded me the ability to be able to do a lot of things in wrestling that some other wrestlers can struggle with, just because I've been able to build a career and get an education. And that's allowed me to have a lot more opportunities that perhaps I wouldn't have.
For me, a lot of it was connecting with people, finding out when they're running shows. I'd look at the time, and obviously wrestling has changed a lot, but a lot of these things I think are still applicable now. Find out who's operating in your area. Give yourself a pretty wide berth of maybe 2 to 4 hours of driving both ways. Just find out who's operating there, and when they're running shows, reach out to them and say, hey, I'm getting through with wrestling school and I'm about ready to start working shows, and I'd like to show up and just help out. Probably not best to just try to ask for a booking. You're more likely to get dismissed. And this is, of course, operating on the fact that you're going to a wrestling school that isn't providing you with a lot of connections. But these are also applicable when the wrestling school is providing you with a lot of help with making connections and building your network. But you also want to go outside of that, because their network may not include some promotions in your area who they're just either not friendly with, or that just happens to be outside of that. But in any case, I think the smart thing to do is to reach out, find out who's booking those promotions, who's promoting those promotions, and just offer to help. That means showing up to the show a few hours early, setting up chairs, helping to put the ring together, whatever they need in order to make the show happen. You might do that for a while. It might be, 3 or 4 shows, 5 shows, a year of shows, who knows, before you get an opportunity. And that can be a little disheartening, because it means that you're doing a lot of work and maybe you may not ever get a spot. But I can say from personal experience that showing up and helping out, got me a lot of opportunities. It showed that I was willing to put in the work. It showed that I cared more about the show functioning and the show getting up and running necessarily than I did about myself. And it meant that I was present, and just getting my face in front of people, getting to know them, getting them comfortable with me and me getting comfortable with them. It showed that I was that I was there and that I would be willing to do whatever I need to do to make the show better. So when the chance came up to say, hey, we had someone drop off, or hey, we're thinking about putting a match on, to start the show, and we just want a couple of local guys or students or whatever to give them a tryout, you'll start getting those opportunities. And even if you've been around a while and you've been working shows, this is still a great strategy in order to get on. And I know that this is, if you're in wrestling, this is by no means new advice. This is the kind of advice that you get from just about anyone, but it still works, and it's still very much useful to do that. For one, you're going to meet a lot of people, and you're also going to learn a lot. I mean, you should understand how a ring is constructed. You should understand what goes into making a show work and making it happen. You'll meet people who have been doing this kind of stuff for a long time, and they'll teach you a lot about the other side of wrestling and how it's presented and what makes a show actually happen. And then the other thing is, once you have some establishment, film yourself doing promos. Go and get professional photo work done so that you have promo shots in order to give to promoters, and put it on a Google Drive, and that way make it shareable to people so that they can see a body of work, where you've been. Make a resume. If you've worked for a few places, if you have a school that you went to, provide it. Get references. If your trainer is willing to vouch for you, ask for them to vouch for you to other places if they happen to reach out, because so much of wrestling is word of mouth. I mean, it's, hey, this person says that I'm good enough to be on your show. I'm good enough to work for you, and them trusting that person's word, and then therefore giving you an opportunity. But a lot of it is also just showing that you're willing to help, because wrestling isn't done by just one person. It takes a team of people to make a show happen, even if it's not very big. And so they need the help. And if you're there and you're showing your face all the time, eventually you will get opportunities.
All right, just want to do a quick run through on everything tonight. Show starts at 6. Obviously, VIP doors are going to be at 5, so we got another hour and a half or so before that happens. Show starts off with Tony introing, and Gymnastic Boys are going to come out for a moment, get a little bit of time on the mic. And then Joey will come out. They'll introduce the first match, which is Joey and the Gymnastic Boys against Savannah Evans, Trish, and Sawyer Wreck.
Probably the hardest part about both booking a show and running the show day of, and also wrestling on the show, is that I have to keep track of all of the little moving parts and all of the minutiae so that the show runs correctly and on time, and that everybody has the instructions and the information that they need. There's always little problems that come up and things that need to be addressed. Typically, we try to have a team of people that can handle things, so that way not one person is stuck trying to keep it all together. But it's still difficult because a lot of people are going to come to me and ask me questions, and then I also have to think about what am I doing on the show. Then also too, I don't want to place too much importance on myself, because as the booker,
I've been doing this.
you have the license. As the booker, you have the license to be able to write your own playbook and write your own story. And you can't do that with yourself, because if you do, then now you're just indulging in your own self-importance. It's just terrible. It's just bad. It's a very egotistical and poorly thought out. I really try to insert myself in ways so that other people can look good, and try to do things that are interesting, or give, some kind of a role that will help other people be more important than I am. Obviously I try to do things that I think are fun and interesting for myself, but it's not all about me. It's more about the whole roster and making the whole roster look good, or whomever we're trying to work with to make them have a more important role in the business, or just to get them more recognition, whatever it is.
How do I feel about intergender wrestling? I think intergender wrestling is no different than anything else. I don't think we should even define wrestling by gender roles specifically. I've worked with a lot of women who are insanely talented and who are certainly more talented than a lot of their male peers. I've been tagging with Max, the Impaler, recently in a tag team that is intergender. And I don't think that there's really any difference. Max is extremely strong. I mean, she's virtually the same size as I am. I don't know a lot of men in wrestling who are as strong as Max. She's incredibly strong. And that's not taking anything away from the women who are not as strong as Max. Their skills are in a different area. So I think the controversy of intergender wrestling is based more on fans whose opinions matter, but I think that they think they matter a little more than they actually do. And that's not to take away from the fact that it's not important for them to be heard. It's just that I think they think that there's something wrong about a man and a woman getting in a fight, but we don't even notice it when it's in a film. I mean, men and women get into fights with one another in Marvel and DC films all the time. They've been getting in fights in action movies all the time, and it's certainly not a problem for anyone. I like to make the joke that this generation of wrestling is very comfortable with intergender because we came up with Mortal Kombat and Street Fighter, so men and women fighting is pretty damn normal. I don't really see a significant difference. If I'm fighting someone who weighs 150 pounds and they're a man or a woman, to me, they're essentially the same. I think my favorite part about being a professional wrestler is performance of things. I've had violent feuds where I'm deeply hated and spit on and screamed at and had bottles thrown at me. And there's something perhaps oddly satisfying about being able to pull people in that way and to have people react to you in that way. And it's, on the same side, I've been able to make people laugh during a match and create comedy in my own way. I've been able to be loved and appreciated and chanted for. And So being a pro wrestler allows you to be able to step into so many different roles of performance and of entertaining. That's really hard to equate with any other type of entertainment. And of course, there's the character work, and I make all my own gear. I design all of my own gear. The looks and the concepts are all on my own, and I take various inspirations to put them together. But that's another big thing for me that I really enjoy. I mean, what Leon Scott started out as, and now I just really am going by Leon, is evolved and changed so many times, and that's all just at the whims of my own creativity. Like, what do I want to do next? Getting to work with so many great people is another huge thing. It's just when you have the right opponent and the chemistry is there and the creative cohesion is there, and you're just cooperating so well, and you trust each other and you know each other, even if you've only just met. It's incredibly exciting, and it gives you a rush and a sensation that I've not experienced. What's left for Leon Scott to do in the wrestling business? I think what's left for Leon, I have a lot of different things that I'd like to accomplish. I've never been to Japan. I've always wanted to go to Japan. It's not something I've got to do yet. There's a lot of people that I want to wrestle that are out there right now that I haven't had matches with. Some great people in North Carolina that I haven't been able to wrestle with. There's some people in New York I haven't been able to wrestle with. It would be nice to do something on a major stage again. My time in MLW was relatively brief, just a year. There was a lot more that I would like to have done there, but unfortunately, just differences in the business, didn't allow that to happen as much. But I could see myself, in roles in places like Impact or AEW. I don't think that I would want to work in a wrestling role in WWE right now. I think that I'm probably past the point where they would be interested. Obviously there's a lot of creative things that I'd like to do. I really get into telling the stories of wrestling. I like to book compelling feuds and come up with interesting match concepts, and even just things that I haven't seen before in terms of social issues, things like that I think could be incorporated into pro wrestling in compelling ways. There's more of that I'd like to do, whether that's somewhere locally in an independent show or, whether that ends up transitioning to something more significant. That's something I'd like to do. Creating more opportunities for people, particularly making sure that, underrepresented minorities and groups of people are represented more in wrestling. I think that's super important, and I think it's bringing obviously more success to the people who are in the business that are trying to do that, but it's also bringing, more fans and more eyes on independent wrestling and just wrestling in general. But it's also creating a sense that more people belong and that you're being represented by someone who looks like you, who feels like you, whose experiences are like you. And I think that that's an important part of wrestling that any contribution that I can make towards that end would be something that makes me very happy. Other than that, I mean, I could see myself transitioning into a manager role and working with people in that way. So there's a lot of different things that I can still see myself doing. I don't know when my time in wrestling will be over, but it's certainly not going to be anytime soon.